Welcome back to the Talking Sales series, and I've got Jim Duffy again. G'day, Jim. How are you doing?
It's great to be with you, John.
Hey, we had a great discussion about focus targeting to ensure we get a high hit rate on our prospecting, on our outbound calls. And that was good discussion. But I know you do, to get this high hit rate, you do a lot in the area of research. Can you tell us a little bit about the sort of research you do?
Well, first of all, what I do is I find out what my client does and see what their targets are. And I use LinkedIn Sales Navigator as a means to target the attorneys that my customer seeks to serve. So in other words, my forensic accountant has a particular type of attorney that they're trying to meet with. And I can use LinkedIn Sales Navigator to find most of those attorneys that have those particular backgrounds. And we find that primarily in all of the unstructured data that is written primarily by the attorney themselves about themselves. So in other words, that research that we're doing is on that unstructured data so that we can understand what are the most important things about that attorney so we can connect to them on a visceral basis.
Okay, so how do you go about that, Jim?
So let's say, for example, I have one of my experts who's a white collar crime expert, and will do all the accounting at uncovering these white collar crimes. We will then use the language or the nomenclature of the attorney, be it white collar crime as a key word. We'll use embezzlement, all these different words that help us to find all of the attorneys that have those particular backgrounds that align specifically with what my client does.
Okay, and so you've identified names at this stage, and the people very, very clearly in the target you're about to go to. So what level of research then do you drill down to?
Okay, so typically when I do a wide open search, I get thousands of attorneys, and then I narrow it down, and I'll probably get a couple hundred. So I then take that search, and I have offshore folks that will actually help me to gather all of the information, be it the unstructured data, their direct phone number, their email, the firm name. All of that information is collected. Initially, when I started my business, I did all of that, but it's very labor intensive. So I've offshored a lot of that work.
It sounds like a perfect strategy to really get the backbone done. And it is work, that's hack work that you can outsource to somebody, I'm sure. So you're now presented with, you mentioned 200 people in a very focused target. You now have a whole host of structured and unstructured data about those 200 people. Is that right?
That's correct.
And I know we'll talk about it more, but you've got technology that helps you in collating and formulating all of this and preparing it for the call you're making, right?
Yes, and what we'll do furthermore with the data is we'll thin slice the data. So we'll take phrases from what the attorney does that directly correlates to what the expert does. So and I can get more into the detail on that, but we get into that very narrow information that's unstructured, that is specific phrases that the attorney uses that really tells the story of what the attorney does and helps us to connect with them on a visceral basis.
Now, what you said, we talked about technology. I'm really interested in a little bit in how the technology helps you. So what technology do you use to either to prepare this data and to present the data when you actually make the call?
Well, again, I use LinkedIn Sales Navigator to find the attorneys. So that's a pretty widely used process. And certainly all of your viewers can utilize LinkedIn Sales Navigator. It's something
a very powerful tool that I don't think is utilized anywhere near enough across the base of clients that I work with.
Right. And then I actually have folks offshore that will take all of that URL from LinkedIn Sales Navigator, where I've built really the identifiable market. And then I ship that URL over to my folks, in India, and then they will go directly to the attorney's website and pull all of the information that they have. I can also use databases from a LexisNexis database that will connect to what the attorney does, so I can find out some of those big cases that they've been involved in. So there's a number of tools that I use, but LinkedIn Sales Navigator is really the backbone.
Okay,
Now,
fantastic.
with the calling process, I also have tools, but
All right, we'll talk calling process technology on our next call. So,
sure.
So I think I've got the gist of that. The real message is the level and depth of research you do to ensure that you have a high level of structured and, more importantly, unstructured data, so that you're able, when you make the call, you're able to very quickly flash up some unstructured data that's very relevant to the client to get their attention straight away.
Absolutely, John.
Okay.
That's spot on.
All right. Anything else in research before we go? Well, next we'll talk about the call itself.
The one thing I would say anybody who's getting into sales is that although you might even outsource some of your research, I would definitely recommend that you do some of the research yourself, because that's part of building your expertise. And if you're going to know about a customer, you've got to understand them in a very intimate basis. So I'd say read. Critical thinking, reading. If you read enough, you'll really get to understand what the customer is all about.
Helping to build that domain expertise so that when you do have the conversation, the conversation's got a very natural flow to it. You have the domain expertise, you can have that peer-to-peer relationship built very quickly.
Yes, you can build a trusted relationship when what you bring to the table can be trusted.
Jim, thank you very much. I really look forward to our next discussion when you actually tell us how you go about making that call and a bit of the technology that helps you do that. Jim, look forward to the next time.
I do too. Thanks again.
This episode of Talking Sales is sponsored by the authors of the new page-turning sales novel, The Wentworth Prospect. In the words of one reviewer, it's B2B sales mastery delivered in an ingenious, engaging, and hugely entertaining way. Get it now at your favorite book retailer.